In Conversations today, my guest is British, but he has spent more than 45 years in India, now his home. He's an architect who's built a reputation not on the grand and the glamorous structures of India, but in working with the poor, embodying their aspirations in his work, in his structures, reflecting their needs and their environments. I'm delighted to welcome Laurie Baker.
Thank you.
Your houses have this wonderful quality of quietude and stillness, and there always seems to be a center where you feel a sense of peace and centeredness.
Yeah.
That's been my experience of
Yeah.
entering sort of famous Baker homes. When a house sort of begins to take shape in your mind's eye, as it were, what are the elements that go into this?
Well, of course, the main one is the client, or clients in plural. And usually when they phone me or come and see me, and then I say, well, first I'd like to see the site where you want to build. And then, of course, we're talking on the way to the site, when we're on the site. Now, what's your idea of where you want to be? Do you want the view, or do you want to have your head in the north or the south or somewhere when you're asleep? And I begin to get to know the client right away. And then I can also see what I would want to do on the site if it were mine. But of course I have to sit on that as much as possible. People vary so much. I don't think I've ever repeated a plan or a house, simply because people are so different, what you want and what I want.
You know, like an artist creates a painting, when does the form begin to take shape?
Oh, I think when I'm walking onto the site, even before they've told me where. It isn't always, I mean, it doesn't always follow through that way, but somehow or other people are able to express themselves, not deliberately, but the way they talk and the sort of things they avoid talking about, you get to know very quickly about them and what the way they live, particularly if they've got one of their family with them, usually a wife and so on. I think usually the wife knows more or can convey more what she wants or what she wants for the family than the man himself.
You know, you were sort of a short while ago describing a horrible concrete box. What for you makes a home, makes for good architecture?
It's a difficult question to answer straight. I think, and of course there are many various ideas from architects of what they think is good and not good and so on. I'm very convinced that if you want a building not to stand out like a sore thumb, it should follow the traditions, not copy them, but follow on with them, that have been going on probably for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And people have used the materials that are right there on the spot, or within an easy distance of a bullock cart, now a lorry, so that there isn't imported material, imported not from abroad, but from another area. And so they look as though they belong. And I don't see any reason not to go on with that tradition, or put it the other way around. I'm very, very much opposed to bringing in things that are not compatible with the local architecture.
How do you reconcile traditional methods of building with our contemporary larger sort of societal notions of development and way the modern city is structured and laid out?
Well, for one thing, you used the word development, and I think we only put one side, I mean, in modern talk, when we say development program, we mean progress, whereas development, actually, you can develop a bad cold or a peptic ulcer. So I think very often we're doing that side of development instead of what we mean by progress. And then where is it leading us all? People can't sit in a room without the air conditioner these days. When I came to India, it was 55, not 45 years ago. I lived in several of the old bungalows. I mean, I'd stay there from time to time, which were extremely cool, even in when the temperature was up, you know, is very high in UP and so on. And they were, you could be comfortable without all this capital D and inverted commas development.
Well, let's say, you know, because of the imperatives of modernization,
yes.
and we are also the little cogs in the wheel,
yes.
What kind of architecture could I aspire to, living in the heart of urban Delhi, that would be feasible and possible, and yet in consonance with many of the aspirations that you know, your kind of architecture is that we dream about?
Well, you see, from the structural point of view, of course, if you wanted a 5-story building, then it's a different matter. And in a place like Delhi, Delhi seems to have lots of spare land, though it doesn't really have it, just because you see so many trees everywhere. But you can't afford to have everybody living in a bungalow, in a Lachin's bungalow,
well, exactly.
for instance. But if you did have a little bit of land and you wanted to build on, you could build 2 or 3 stories using old systems. One of them was just the thickness of a wall. When I was first here in Allahabad, for instance, at the Agins, the Agricultural Institute there, I did quite a lot of experiments, finding out the relative temperatures inside and outside of the different types of building, and thick walls and the you know, the thick flat roofs that they had there with the tiled thing on top. You would only be very slightly warmer at the end of the day than you'd been at the beginning of the day. And by the outside of the wall you couldn't touch, but the inside, because the walls were this thick, were cool comparatively. And the other thing was, you see, the old buildings, they understood, without knowing any science in inverted commas again, they understood the principles of ventilation. Air comes in here, hot air rises from contact with bodies and cooking and all the rest of it, and it goes out at the little holes in the top. The Kerala roof is a typical one, you know, with these ears at the top. Well, now, there's actually a flow of air going through, even though it's hot. In a humid climate, you want that movement of air, and that is enough to, I mean, the temperature isn't the same as it is here in Delhi, but there's that way of doing it. I have done buildings with an ordinary brick wall on one side, a 4.5-inch brick, and another 4.5-inch on the inside, and filled the middle up with a lot of rubbish, meaning soil and lumps of this, that, and the other. And that does keep cool with the proper ventilation system. The other one is to use a simple cavity wall, the outside. For instance, at the Center for Development Studies in Trivandrum, I did the computer center where everybody said, oh, it must be air conditioning, air conditioned and so on. But I made inquiries about it, and it doesn't have to be air conditioned. It's better that you have a controlled temperature and a regular level temperature. And that I've done by using the old jali, not the nice beautiful carving that we have here in the Red Fort and so on, but the brick jali, then a cavity, and then the ordinary simple 9-inch load-bearing brick wall inside. The inside remains at one temperature the whole day long. So there are many ways of carrying on the traditional methods, you know, not being quite so primitive, and making it a little more acceptable.
You've been in India for, as you just said, reminded us, for 55 years. What has kept you here?
Oh, my wife. No, it's I think, first of all, I came because of a particular need. It was during the war, of course. And I'm a Quaker, and don't think wars are the right way to settle arguments between nations. So I was doing relief work, and I was in China for a few years, then came here. And in China, one of my jobs, or the main job I'd had, was looking after or keeping leprosy patients out of the way. They didn't fit in with refugee camps and all that sort of thing. And the treatment of ordinary people towards people with leprosy was not very kind and nice. So I'd got mixed up with this work. Then when I came back through India, I waiting for a boat.
That was the chance encounter with Gandhi.
Yes, so I met him. Then when I got back to England, I just thought I'd go and see this leprosy mission. I went to meet them, and they were waiting for sort of with open hands for an architect or a builder or an engineer to convert all the old homes, refuge into hospitals where people could actually be treated and where they could get surgery and so on. So I came back immediately to do that specific job. But then always, this I think is where I got my love of rural India, because patients and people suffering from leprosy are kept as far away from the public as possible. So many of the homes that I went to, either I would have to walk miles and miles or go on a bullock cart or an egg car or a tonga or something like that. And this got me interested in the whole structure of India, from the very peculiar, particular way of living in urban India, and a completely different way for the majority of people. Gandhiji had said to me when I was in Bombay, he was having the famous Gandhi dinner talks at that time, trying to prevent partition. And he'd said, you mustn't think that this Bombay is India, or typical India. You must go into the villages. And he told me, suggested places I should go, because I had 3 months to wait for a boat. And it was quite true, and it's still true, unfortunately. Still 70% nearly of our population are in very poor rural conditions. Parts of rural India have changed, but there are many that haven't.
Much of your work has been in developing low-cost housing for the poor. Do you think this has had something to do with your background as a Quaker, the impact of Gandhi, that you have chosen to work in perhaps a less glamorous...
No, it's not from the glamorous point of view. It's seeing these extremes, which I don't think need be. I was, this morning I've been to Hudco around the corner, and I was with Hudco for a time on their governing body, and we divided people up then, and still do, into HIG, that's high income group, MIG, middle income group, LIG, low income group. Then we don't like to say the poor, so we call them EWS, economically weaker section. But I was always bringing up the subject very uncomfortably for others. What about the NIGs, the no income group? It was argued that there was no such thing. Everybody can and should. But in fact, there are comparatively no-income group people. So I just didn't want to waste my time, not waste my time, that's the wrong way to put it, but to spend time on middle class, and particularly upper middle class, who had the money to employ anybody. Architects who like to do that sort of thing and want to do it. No, obviously it has to be done. But I didn't think I wanted to spend my time in that way.
You know, you use sort of LIG and MIG, and these are phrases we associate, at least in Delhi, with the most awful group housing schemes and government-promoted housing schemes. Have you ever looked at and worked with housing schemes in large numbers for people?
Yes, I've tried to. I've done not the very large, but smaller groups. one of the biggest problem I have is that more often than not it's some government scheme, for instance, and almost invariably the powers that be, who are promoting the thing and providing the money for the thing, they just want a prototype plan, and they want a plot of land. They divide up into squares with little roads and little square plots and boxes in straight rows. Well, my feeling is that rural people, poor people, slum people are just the same as the rest of us. One family may be a man and his wife and a child. Another family may be a man and one or two wives and a grandmother and an unmarried sister and all their children and so on. So why give them the same? And particularly in slum areas, you find that there are different communities. They've separated themselves up. And they live in a different way. I mean, they use their property such as it is, even if it's only a house 10 feet, a shack 10 feet square. They use it quite differently from another group only 20 yards away. So I don't see why we should give. So when I fight this idea of the prototype, one plan for every, there was one only 2 or 3 years ago, where the idea was that I think the Prime Minister then was aiming at 1 million houses. And when I saw him after we'd tried to get the scheme moving, he said, well, what's holding up? So one of the problems is land. He said, land? There's lots of land all over the place. But then it's no good giving people any old bit of land. It must be that they can cultivate or get work. If it's wasteland in India, it means it's no good. Any land that can be cultivated or used in some way or other is already being done so. And then the other one was money. Money? There's lots of money. And so I said, you have suggested that we can, this is only 3-4 years ago, we can build for 9,000 a house. So I said last week, or 2 weeks ago, my refrigerator expired and I had to get a new one. It only cost me 12,500. And I'm supposed to build houses for 9,000 instead of 12,000 for a fridge. So it just isn't reasonable. And why give everybody 9,000 if there are 10 people in one family and 2 in another? Surely that should be somehow or other balanced.
But that 9,000 is fairly close to an almost legendary figure of 10,000 that you built amongst your early houses for the poor.
Oh yes, but then you see 20 years ago 10,000 now would be, well, 5 lakhs or something like that. No, I mean, I think the first 2 houses I built for the Archbishop in, not for him to live in, but in Trivandrum. One cost 3,500, and he brought the chief engineer and the chief secretary to see this house, and the chief engineer said, how much? I said 3,500, and the Archbishop has kept the accounts and paid for it. And then he said, and how many square feet? I've forgotten what it was. He said our service charges alone would cost that. And then a whole group of people, a committee, came along and they said, this is too good for the poor. So then I did another house next to it for 2,500. But again, of course, that, as I say, that was when, not before 1970, 1960.
Well, to get back to this question of what has attracted you and kept you in India?
This infinite scope. What I can't stop. I'm 82, but people say, why don't you retire? But how can you when there's all this sort of thing going on? But I do build, as you know, for top dogs, for instance. A very good example, the man who was the senior most man, the head of the ISRO or BSSC at Trivandrum, the space rocket station. He asked me to build his house, but he wanted it using all these cost-reducing techniques and avoiding excessive energy-intensive materials and so on. Now, and I did it quite willingly because I knew that if he did it, other people, if you have somebody up at the top, other people. I don't think I've hardly ever been without people from BSSC. Of course, they've got 5,000-6,000 workers there, coming right from drivers, peons, up to the top scientists. So it's well worth going for the top dog first. The same with Dr. K.N. Raj, who started the Centre for Development Studies. I think now nearly all the young men, the people who were young men when we started in 1970, now they've acquired land immediately around the centre, and I built houses. All of them have come to me for houses.
You know, the proverbial relationship between architect and client is a tumultuous one, and usually you have a dissatisfied, frustrated client tearing his hair out. How have you managed to keep your relationship different?
Well, for one thing, I choose my clients. I mean, if I know he's a hair tatter, then I'd say, I think you'd better go to somebody else. You know, I've only been let down 2 or 3 times, only, where people have come and said, please, Mr. Baker, we want your sort of building and so on. And one of the things I don't do, or I should put it the other way, my main system is to say, what is it you actually need? And then if I can give them that and how much money have you got? If I can do that, and are we missing out anything that you really want? So when they say, what do you mean, need? And there's the space and how much you use for a bedroom and how people use a bedroom, whether they just go in and sleep and come out again, or whether they do their typing and their knitting and their ironing and all the rest of it.
You know, people say that they want their heads facing north and what have you. To you, does Vastu have any sort of bearing and significance to your work?
I've never I've never been able to accept it wholly. I think a lot of these traditions, not only Vastu but others, have a reason behind them. But of course, more and more, particularly in urban areas, it's extremely difficult to follow it. If you must have your entrance in the southwest or east or whatever it is, and the road is over on the northwest, what do you do about it? Do you have a tunnel underground and come up on the other side? So it's very difficult to follow. And not many people in the present stage are particularly interested. But again, one of the top dogs who I've mentioned, it was rather amusing when I was doing their house. I'd finished all the walls and everything, and the rooms were there, and starting on floors and electrification, things like that. And one morning he and his wife were there, and they said, Laurie, I'm afraid we can't have the work area, you know, the place outside the kitchen. We can't have it here, we want it over there. And I said, but how are you going to get there during the rains? This is Kerala with heavy driving rain and so on. Anyway, we can't have it here, we want it over there. And I tried to reason with them, but you know, it was very inconvenient. And when you want to do this, and so on, and then bring it all the way back. And at last the wife said, this is from one of the top scientists in the country, his wife said, I'm sorry, Laurie, but you have to take it from me. The grinding stone cannot look at the fireplace. So I thought this was rather extraordinary, and the poor scientist didn't know where to put himself. But probably there's a good reason for it. If you've got a pot of boiling oil for making puris or something, and there's water nearby, and some water gets in, the whole thing goes up in flame. So there must be reasons for this, quite apart from the mystical side of it. And,
55 years of being in India and watching it change and, in inverted commas, develop. And it's the 50th year of India's independence. How do you feel? Do you despair at the way India has evolved? Do you feel good about it?
Oh, there's plenty of good about it, and there is a certain amount of development, but I still think the emphasis is at the wrong end. To go back to the HIGs, far too much for HIGs and very, very little for NIGs. The other thing is this, it's not only the cost that I'm concerned about, it's this whole question of energy, meaning fuel. And almost all the things we use in the modern world are in some way or other energy intensive, all our vehicles, things like steel. We've got mountains, endless quantities of iron ore. But to convert that into quality steel, we haven't got the energy.
82 years young. What do you look for the rest of your life?
Oh, I was going to say another 82 years.
Well, good luck and thank you very much. It has been a privilege having you on this program.
Thank you.